What's up guys, I'm BTC. The Overwatch devs gave us a ton of information the other day, including buffs, nerfs, reworks, new game modes, and more. The other day during the developer live stream, Jeff Goodman, who is the principal designer for Overwatch, gave us a ton of information. I kind of picked out all of the important stuff, and I'm going to give you a complete breakdown. I don't want to go into too much detail on each one of these individual things. Some of them I am going to be making an entire video about because the topics are that big that they require a lot more discussion. So for right now, I'm going to try to keep it a little more concise. So the first thing is Echo will 100% be a new hero. We got introduced to this character during BlizzCon in the McCree animation. Jeff Kaplan gave us a little bit of background information, said the character is hugely important in the world of Overwatch. My guess is they're probably going to do something like this character, Echo, kind of unites Omnics and humans and blah, 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 that sort of thing. It's kind of a trope, but, you know, whatever. So Jeff Kaplan said that 100% she was not Hero 30, but Jeff Goodman did say we are absolutely getting her as a hero, just they have to kind of build up some other stuff first. Speaking of more heroes, Jeff Goodman reiterated that they understand there's kind of a lack of tanks and healers, and that the next couple characters, there's probably going to be more heavily onto the healer side than anything else. He also talked about higher skill requirement healers, more like Ana, where you have to aim in order to heal your teammates. He gave kind of a wishy-washy answer. I don't really think it's a solid yes or no. I think just from the way he was talking, it's like a maybe that we'll see something like that. But it seems like most of the healers they want to have with a lower skill floor and a lower skill ceiling. He did give a hint at a potential new DPS character, which would have a hit scan 3-round burst. So rather like McCree or Ashe, that's only a single shot, and Soldier that has full auto, this character would have a 3-round burst. But it's probably not going to happen anytime soon. It's just something that will likely happen at some point in the future. As far as the total number of heroes, he did say that he would like to have a larger hero pool. We're talking like 70 to 100 heroes. But the problem is that they find they don't want to do too much overlap where you have a character and they have to be completely unique. I don't particularly think that's a good idea. I think it's perfectly fine if heroes do have overlap. For example, you could have another tank with a barrier shield similar to Reinhardt, but as long as the rest of their kit is completely different, then it would be fine. Like, you can still run similar comps. You can have Reinhardt or that other character with the barrier shield, but you'd have to modify your strategy depending on which one of them you're using. So I think that's totally fine that you have some aspect of the characters that overlaps, but you just, you know, it doesn't have to be completely unique is kind of what I'm getting at. Here's the problem though. If they're going to have a large hero pool, they would need to absolutely speed up the release timetable on those heroes, because right now it's 3 a year, and it would take somewhere between 15 and 22 years in order to actually get a large enough hero pool to do some of the other stuff that they want to do, namely the next thing, which is hero bans. He said that it's good and it's bad, there's some things that work, but with Overwatch right now, there's just not enough heroes in the game for there really to be a good ban. Because if you were to ban Reinhardt, for example, was the one he gave, then you would just completely shut out all these different kinds of comps, and you have these teams that are trying to run these particular strategies, and what would end up happening is, rather than having more specific strategies, you would have this incredibly kind of bland, generic strategy that everyone would run, and you'd have to be able to just kind of use whatever. So if your barrier tank gets banned, then, you know, you just can't do that. That's why I kind of think having some of that overlap, as I mentioned earlier, would be a good idea. Now, he also mentioned up a very good point, which is the hero-specific, player-specific bans. So if you have a person on the enemy team who is exceptional at Zenyatta, then you ban Zenyatta and it cripples their team because they're not able to run that one thing that they need to run in order to really be effective. And from a spectator point of view, you have lots of fans that want to watch that. We're talking about Overwatch League tournament level stuff here. You have people that want to watch that player using that hero, and you can't because it gets banned out. So in Dota 2, this does happen on a regular basis. Someone on the enemy team is very good at a particular hero, so they ban out that hero. But the thing is, the hero pool is so gigantic, it's like 115 or something now in Dota 2, that they can run a bunch of other stuff that's kind of similar to it. Like, you don't have to run that one specific hero. They can run this or this that are kind of similar, and that's what I was talking about with the Reinhardt example. Like, there's enough of an overlap where they may not be able to run that one specific one, but they can run something that's kind of close to it and still be really good and effective with it. So I do understand that, but with the low hero pool, yeah, that's a problem. Moving on to the hero balance, he says they're always working on it, buffs and nerfs to this and that, but right now they're trying to prioritize dealing with CC, crowd control effects. They still want them to be effective, but they don't want them to be completely frustrating. And he talked about that they don't have anyone specifically that they're reworking at this moment, but if someone was to get a rework, most likely it would be Bastion. Although he did talk a little bit about how they like that Bastion is niche. I don't think that's a good idea at all. Right now, Bastion has a 0.04% pick rate. It's the lowest in the game by an extremely large margin. And if they're going to spend anywhere between 6 to 9 months to build one of these characters, to create it, design it, program it, test it, to have it only with a 0.04% pick rate and having the character only show up once every 300 or 400 matches, I don't think that's a very good time investment. So I think it's fine for characters not to be used in every match, but they shouldn't be like that. And I actually do have a full Bastion rework video, how they can fix the character, everything they need to do in order to make the character both viable and not overpowering in the lower brackets. I'm still working on that video, but it should be out soon. As far as the situation with the meta, they're aware that it can get stale really fast, particularly what we had with the dive before and now what we're kind of having with goats. They did add Brig specifically to be anti-dive, but they felt that she was a little too strong against dive. Like, that character kind of single-handedly destroyed the dive meta, but it's kind of funny because now we have dive meta kind of coming back, but it's in the form of triple tank, triple support. So we still kind of have it, it's just a different version, but they did feel that Brigitte was too strong for specifically countering dive and shutting it down, and they don't want any one hero to just destroy everything like that. As far as the changes to Brigitte herself, it was brought up about a passive healing cap, because the reason why Brigitte is so powerful in the GOATS comp, in the triple, is because she can just constantly heal everyone. And it's actually not the shield bash. Like, her losing the shield bash through barriers actually makes GOATS comp even stronger. But the thing is, she was able to just heal everybody, and she was kind of behind the Reinhardt, behind the Zarya. She was in a situation where she could be kind of protected and insulated from everybody and just constantly healing everything. And the main issue with all of these different heals, like you have the Brigitte, you have the Lucio, you have the Moira, or, you know, whatever, you have all these heals that are just kind of stacking on each other, and it was brought up maybe they should have like a healing cap where when you have certain numbers of passive healing effects, it doesn't work anymore. But they really, really do not like that at all. They don't want to ever add that, because they don't want to get into a situation where people have to figure out, okay, well, if I play this character and I put this buff on a hero, then another person's buff, their healing will override my healing, and then, you know, that all sorts of stuff. They don't want that. So they would rather try to look at the problems from different directions than to have any sort of healing caps or stacking rules about that sort of thing. Also about the team comps and the metas, their goal is to make it so that one comp can be countered by another, and then that comp can be countered by another, and that one can be countered by another, or perhaps the original one. So there's kind of this rock, paper, scissors thing. Now, obviously, they've been failing with this ever since the game came out. The game has almost always had a meta where the most optimal solution is to simply run a mirror match. I mean, there are other things that can sometimes be effective, but most of the time, your best bet is to simply run a mirror into whatever they're running. Like, whatever the most optimal thing is. Like, when it was dive, you ran dive. When it's goats, you would kind of run goats. I mean, yes, you can run other things, but you're better off just running goats into goats and, you know, just kind of doing that. So they need to work on that for certain, but their goal is to have it so that there's more of a rock, paper, scissors. Now, as far as Diva, they said that she's in a very interesting situation because she does have one of, if not the highest pick rate almost all the time right now, because the character is very strong. Particularly, they think it's from the defense matrix, just being able to shut down a lot of stuff and just completely delete all the damage for a very short amount of time. But they don't really know what to do with the character. But they also think it's interesting because while she has such a high pick rate, and while she's viewed as almost mandatory in a lot of situations, very few people are actually complaining about the character. So it's not like when Mercy was a must pick, right? Like, people aren't complaining about the character now. It's just like, okay, yeah, you just run Diva. Like, so it's in a weird situation. They're not quite sure what to do. One possible solution was that they could add more stuff that counters her, because a rule that they have is anything that's kind of like a laser, so Zarya or Moira or Symmetra, anything that's kind of like a laser cannot be matrixed or deflected by Genji. So if they were to add more stuff that just bypasses the matrix, then it might actually be enough to just kind of knock Diva down a little bit. And speaking of Symmetra, and Mei also got kind of lumped into this as well, is he believes that there's a lot of potential, but it's kind of just pushed aside, because often when you would want to run a Symmetra or a Mei, you're just better off running a different DPS. So you could just run a McCree or an Ashe or whatever. Rather than trying to deal with these fancy strategies and tactics and stuff, if you just basically click heads and you take out the enemy, then there's no reason for that. So that's kind of the problem that Symmetra and Mei are in right now, that he believes is that they have a lot of potential, it's just they can't be used because why bother when you can just click heads. Now, as far as the tanks, he does believe that the damage is high, but it doesn't sound like they have any plans to change it, because the way he was talking about it, he's like, well, you know, Winston does a lot of damage if the enemy are close up, or they're grouped up, but if they're spread out and you're only attacking one, then your damage is really low. Now, I think this is kind of true, but the problem is that most tank damage is actually on par with the other DPS, particularly Diva and Zarya. They can do just as much, if not more damage, than any of the characters in the DPS role. So I do think that they actually need to take a look at that, but from what he was saying, it sounds like they have no plans to change that whatsoever. Now, another thing that they talked about was a railgun. So there are other games like Quake and whatnot where a railgun is essentially just a one-shot weapon. It's unbelievably powerful, it's kind of slow, it's a pinpoint hit scan, and you just one-shot your enemies. And he said that it's cool, but they would really never want to add that to Overwatch, because if you do, it's just gonna completely destroy the game balance. So they're experimenting with a way to add a railgun to Overwatch, but in a way that it would still work. So my guess is that it would definitely not be an insta-kill on anybody, but that's a possible for a new character, or at least a new weapon. He said that they're working on new arcade modes. There's all kinds of stuff that they can do. You know, originally they didn't think deathmatch or capture the flag could be added to the game, but now that they have the arcade, they have all kinds of stuff. They even had competitive versions of that thing, so that could work. They also talked about potential buffs for Pharah, but it doesn't sound like they're interested in doing anything, which is kind of unfortunate, because right now Pharah is one of the least played characters in the game. She's being completely shut down by the most recent buffs to Soldier, McCree, and of course Ashe got added. But one of the things he mentioned was a super old function of her Concussive Blast, where it used to do a huge amount of bonus damage to barriers. And this was way back in the beta. It might have actually even been alpha, but they removed it because it made Pharah almost mandatory whenever you were going against someone with a barrier. And at that time, it was pretty much just Reinhardt. I mean, Winston had a bubble, but it was garbage back then. So they kind of like, no, we don't want this, because it would make Pharah absolutely mandatory. And they don't want to have characters that have a super hard, very specific counter. Like, if you're running this, then you have to run this, and it just completely shuts it down and it wipes it out. It did mention some things on ultimate changes. The frequency of the ultimates were nerfed before, and it's possible that they could do it again at some point. Basically, they increased the amount of ult charge everyone needed just across the board. I think it was 15%. It's possible they could do it again, but probably not going to happen anytime soon. What they would rather do is introduce more ultimates for new characters that function more like Tracer, where it can have a big impact in kind of a small part of the fight, but it doesn't have this massive team swinging potential like a Zarya Grab or an Earth Shatter or something like that, where when you get that ultimate, like, it pretty much just changes how the entire fight goes. Whereas Tracer, you just get it, you hit one person, it's basically you get that one elimination, maybe two if you're lucky, or even three, but for the most part, you know, they want lower impact ultimates. Next, they talked about a hero that did a % damage based on health. So it's something that they definitely like, and it would be a very strong counter to Goats and triple tank, triple support. But the problem is, it would make Roadhog virtually unplayable in every other situation. And this kind of goes to what they were talking about with the very specific hard counters to certain heroes. So basically, the idea between this type of attack is the more health the enemy has, the more damage you do with your hit. So that's kind of why it would be really good against Goats, and also just completely destroy Roadhog. But they still like the idea, and they still might implement it at some point, but they need to be very careful, and it needs to be fine-tuned. I think something like that could be really interesting, but in the reverse. Rather than dealing more damage based on your enemy's hit points, it could be based on your own. So if you have full health, then you do less damage, and if you have very low health, then you do a lot of damage. It puts the player in this very precarious situation where, do I want to do more damage at the risk of potentially dying, or do I want to play it safer? I think that sort of stuff would be really cool. He also talked about the potential of crossover heroes, basically taking stuff from Diablo or Warcraft and dropping those characters into Overwatch. He said that's almost certainly never going to happen because it would destroy the lore of the Overwatch universe, but that character skins will continue to happen, and it's something that they really like. And then lastly, he said that there is almost certainly going to be a new version of the PTR next week, but he didn't really give any hints as to what that's going to be. So there you go, a ton of stuff, guys. Now, I do have some other videos talking about this stuff, the total number of heroes, what they need to do, the Bastion rework, all those sorts of things. Those videos should be coming up next week, so if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe. So what do you guys think about all this stuff? Let me know down below. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to see more, subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss anything. Also, come hang out in my Discord server and my Twitch live stream. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters. If you'd like to see what kind of cool VIP rewards you can get, check the links down below. And remember, always blame the controller, because it's never your fault.